The cruelest betrayals are never committed by strangers, they come from the people who promised you forever. Evelyn Ashford tasted the bitter scent of rain drifting through the open balcony doors as the grand ballroom behind her echoed with music that suddenly felt miles away. Moments ago, the winter moon gala had been filled with laughter, crystal glasses, and smiling faces celebrating another year of peace between the northern packs. She had stood proudly beside Alpha Damien Blackwood, believing she was exactly where fate had always intended her to be. She had loved him through every hardship, defended his name when others questioned his judgment, and believed that loyalty would always find its way back to the heart that gave it so freely. She had been wrong. Damien stood only a few feet away now, his expression unreadable beneath the golden chandelier light, while Vanessa Cole rested confidently at his side with a smile too calm to belong in a room where trust was quietly falling apart. Evelyn searched Damien's eyes, waiting for him to laugh, to explain that this unbearable moment was some terrible misunderstanding. Instead, silence answered her. It was not anger that chilled her soul. It was indifference. The realization settled over her heavier than the storm clouds gathering outside. The man she had chosen above everyone else had already chosen someone else over her. Every promise they had whispered beneath moonlit skies, every dream they had built together, every sacrifice she had made for his future suddenly felt as fragile as frost beneath the morning sun. She felt her strength fading, not because of pain, but because hope itself was slipping through her fingers. Her breathing grew shallow as distant thunder rolled across the mountains surrounding Blackwood Castle. Servants lowered their eyes. Nobles exchanged uneasy glances but remained perfectly still. No one dared question the Alpha. No one dared stand beside the Luna who suddenly seemed invisible. Evelyn lifted her trembling gaze toward Damien one final time. Even now, a small part of her desperately wished he would reach for her hand. Tell them to stop. Tell her to leave. Tell the world that she still mattered. But he never moved. His silence became louder than any accusation ever could. A single tear traced down Evelyn's pale cheek as she whispered words only the wind seemed willing to hear. If there is another life, I will never love you again. Darkness swallowed the glittering ballroom. The music vanished. The cold disappeared. Then warmth returned. Soft sunlight touched her face. Birds sang somewhere beyond an open window. The scent of fresh lilacs replaced the smell of rain. Evelyn opened her eyes sharply and stared at a ceiling she knew by heart. The ivory curtains, the carved oak beams, the silver-framed mirror beside her bed. Her childhood bedroom. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She stumbled toward the calendar resting upon the vanity, her hands shaking before she even reached it. 3 years earlier. 1 week before her engagement to Damien Blackwood. She stared at her own reflection. The same white skin untouched by sorrow. The same bright blue eyes that had not yet learned disappointment. The same young woman who still believed destiny always rewarded love. But behind those familiar eyes lived someone entirely different. Every memory remained. Every betrayal remained. Every promise broken remained. Evelyn slowly closed the calendar and looked toward the morning sun rising over the distant pine forests. This life would not follow the same path. She would not beg. She would not forgive. And she would never again place her future in Damien Blackwood's hands. Somewhere beyond those mountains lived the one man Damien feared more than anyone else, the Alpha King Lucian Thornridge. In her first life, he had been nothing more than a dangerous name whispered in royal courts. In this life, he would become the beginning of a destiny no one would ever see coming. Morning sunlight spread across the polished hardwood floor as though nothing in the world had ever been broken. But Evelyn Ashford knew better. She stood motionless before the tall bedroom window, watching servants prepare the estate below for a celebration that had once filled her heart with excitement. White roses lined the front walkway. Carriages rolled through the front gates one after another. Musicians tuned their instruments beneath colorful banners carrying the Blackwood crest beside her family name. In her first life, she would have rushed downstairs with a hopeful smile, convinced that every step carried her closer to happiness. Now every familiar detail felt like a warning she had already survived. A gentle knock came at the door before her mother entered with a warm smile that immediately softened Evelyn's guarded expression. Catherine Ashford crossed the room and adjusted a loose strand of her daughter's golden hair. "You hardly slept," she said quietly. Every young woman becomes nervous before announcing her engagement. Evelyn forced a small smile because she could not bear to steal this moment from the mother, who had not yet lived through unimaginable grief. She wrapped her arms around Catherine longer than expected, silently grateful for a second chance to feel the embrace she had once believed was gone forever. Her mother laughed softly. "What has gotten into you this morning?" Evelyn stepped back before tears could betray the truth. "I just realized how precious family really is." Catherine smiled without understanding and left her to finish preparing. The door closed and the silence returned. Evelyn opened the drawer beside her bed and carefully removed the sapphire engagement necklace Damien had gifted her during their courtship. In another life she had treasured it more than any crown jewel. She remembered holding it against her heart while dreaming about the future they would build together. Now she looked at the blue stone with calm eyes before placing it back inside the velvet box and closing the drawer forever. Some memories deserved to remain buried. Others existed only to remind her what never deserved a second chance. A maid entered carrying a stack of invitation cards that still required Evelyn's approval before being delivered to neighboring packs. Evelyn scanned the elegant script until one name caught her attention: Thornridge Kingdom. Her pulse quickened. The invitation had been addressed only as a diplomatic courtesy because everyone knew the reclusive Alpha King never attended social ceremonies hosted by rival territories. Yet Evelyn remembered something no one else could possibly know. In only a few weeks, Lucian Thornridge would narrowly escape an assassination attempt while traveling through the Eastern Pass. The attack would fail, but it would ignite years of conflict that reshaped every alliance across the region. Unless someone changed the course of history before it happened. She gently folded the invitation and slipped it into her sleeve. For the first time since awakening, her future no longer seemed controlled by fear. It felt like a chessboard waiting for its first move. Downstairs, guests continued arriving, convinced they were about to witness the beginning of a perfect romance. Evelyn descended the grand staircase with graceful confidence, earning admiring smiles from every noble gathered inside the marble entrance hall. Damien Blackwood stood waiting near the center of the room, handsome, composed, and completely unaware that the woman walking toward him no longer belonged to the future he believed was certain. He welcomed her with the same charming smile that had once melted every doubt in her heart. This time she returned only polite courtesy. As confusion briefly flickered across his face, Evelyn realized something important. Destiny had repeated the day, but it had not repeated the woman who lived it. And before the sun set beyond the mountains, she intended to make one decision that would change every life inside that hall. The grand hall shimmered beneath towering crystal chandeliers as leaders from neighboring packs gathered around polished marble columns, exchanging confident smiles and polite conversation. Every eye eventually turned toward Damien Blackwood and Evelyn Ashford, the couple everyone believed would unite two powerful bloodlines beneath the blessing of the moon goddess. Damien stepped forward with effortless confidence and extended his hand toward Evelyn, expecting the familiar warmth that had always greeted him. Instead, she offered only a courteous nod before walking beside him without taking his hand. The smallest gesture should have gone unnoticed, yet an uneasy silence briefly settled over those standing nearby. Damien studied her face with quiet confusion. She looked exactly the same, yet something behind her blue eyes had changed in a way he could not explain. Before he could ask whether something was wrong, the master of ceremonies raised his voice and announced the arrival of distinguished guests from across the northern territories. One name immediately captured everyone's attention: representatives of Thornridge Kingdom. A ripple of whispers moved through the hall. Everyone knew the legendary Alpha King Lucian Thornridge almost never attended formal gatherings beyond his own borders. His kingdom remained powerful, prosperous, and distant from the politics of rival packs. Few expected anyone from Thornridge to appear at all. Moments later, the enormous entrance doors opened, and several royal guards dressed in dark silver uniforms entered with calm precision. Behind them walked a tall man wearing a charcoal overcoat embroidered with the crest of a silver wolf beneath a crescent moon. His posture was relaxed, yet every step carried quiet authority. Lucian Thornridge had arrived without fanfare, and somehow his silence commanded more attention than the loudest announcement ever could. Conversations faded throughout the ballroom. Damien narrowed his eyes with polite caution while neighboring alphas instinctively straightened their shoulders. Lucian acknowledged no one beyond a respectful inclination of his head. His calm gray eyes swept across the room before resting briefly upon Evelyn. For a single heartbeat, time seemed strangely familiar to her. In another lifetime she had only heard stories about the Alpha King, whose wisdom and restraint earned both admiration and fear. Standing only a few yards away, she realized those stories had never captured the quiet strength surrounding him. There was no arrogance in his expression, no hunger for recognition, only measured observation, as though he weighed every person before deciding whether they deserved his trust. Evelyn drew a slow breath. This was the moment history could still be rewritten. If she remained silent, every tragedy she remembered would eventually return. If she acted now, nothing would ever be the same again. The ceremony continued until the elder invited Damien and Evelyn to step forward and publicly confirm their engagement before the assembled guests. Damien smiled and reached toward her once more. Instead of accepting, Evelyn calmly stepped away. Gasps spread through the hall as she crossed the polished floor with unwavering confidence. Every noble watched in stunned silence while she walked past Damien, past the elders, and stopped directly before Lucian Thornridge. Even the musicians lowered their instruments. Lucian regarded her with composed curiosity, saying nothing. Evelyn met his gaze without hesitation, her voice steady enough to carry through the silent ballroom. "Your Majesty, I know this request is unexpected, but I ask that you hear me before judging me." The Alpha King remained perfectly still. "Go on," he replied. Evelyn lifted her chin, feeling the weight of hundreds of astonished eyes upon her shoulders, yet none of them mattered anymore. "If you are willing," she said, "I would like to become your wife instead." For the first time that evening, even Lucian Thornridge allowed genuine surprise to appear in his eyes. The silence inside the ballroom stretched so long that even the candles seemed afraid to flicker. Noble families exchanged stunned glances while elders struggled to understand whether they had truly heard Evelyn correctly. Damien Blackwood stared at her, as though she had suddenly become a stranger wearing the face of the woman he had planned to marry. "Evelyn," he said carefully, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes, "this is not the time for jokes." She turned toward him with remarkable calm. "I am not joking." The certainty in her voice erased every lingering doubt. Murmurs swept across the hall as several guests quietly whispered that no woman had ever rejected an alpha during a formal engagement ceremony, especially not in front of another king. Damien took one slow step closer. "If I have done something to upset you, we can discuss it privately." In another life, those gentle words would have softened her heart. Today they sounded rehearsed, almost empty. Evelyn simply shook her head. "There is nothing left to discuss." Lucian Thornridge remained silent throughout the exchange, studying both of them with thoughtful restraint. Unlike everyone else in the room, he did not rush to reach a conclusion. He noticed the absence of panic in Evelyn's expression. This was not an emotional impulse. She had arrived prepared to alter the course of her future. At last he spoke, his voice calm enough to quiet the entire hall. "Lady Ashford, do you understand what you are asking?" She met his steady gray eyes without hesitation. "Completely. You are requesting to abandon an alliance between two respected families and replace it with an agreement involving a kingdom you have never even visited." "Yes. And you expect me to believe this decision was made without hidden motives?" Evelyn paused for only a heartbeat. She could not reveal the truth. No one would believe that she carried memories from another lifetime. Instead she answered with quiet honesty. "I expect nothing except the opportunity to prove that my intentions are sincere." Lucian considered her words. Around them, impatience continued building. Damien's father whispered urgently with the council elders while Catherine Ashford watched her daughter with growing concern, unable to understand the transformation she had witnessed throughout the day. Finally Lucian stepped forward until only a few feet separated him from Evelyn. "I do not make decisions based on emotion," he said. "Trust is earned through actions, not promises." Evelyn nodded. "Then allow me the chance to earn it." His gaze lingered on her for several long moments before he reached into his coat and removed a silver coin engraved with the royal crest of Thornridge. He placed it gently into her hand. "3 days from now," he said, "my delegation will depart before sunrise. If you arrive at the eastern gate carrying that coin, I will hear everything you have to say. If you do not come, today will be forgotten and neither of us will speak of it again." Without waiting for an answer, Lucian inclined his head respectfully and turned toward the exit. His royal guards followed in perfect silence. The enormous doors slowly closed behind them, leaving the ballroom suspended between disbelief and uncertainty. Evelyn looked down at the silver coin resting in her palm. It felt unexpectedly warm, as though fate itself had quietly shifted beneath her fingertips. Across the room, Damien watched the exchange with a tightening expression he could not hide. For the first time in his life, he realized he was no longer certain that Evelyn Ashford would always choose him. The moment the ballroom emptied, the celebration everyone had anticipated dissolved into uneasy conversations that echoed through every corridor of Blackwood Castle. Rumors traveled faster than the evening wind. Some believed Evelyn had been frightened by the weight of becoming a Luna. Others whispered that the mysterious Alpha King had somehow enchanted her. None of them knew the truth. Evelyn returned to her room carrying the silver coin hidden inside her pocket, feeling its reassuring weight every time her fingers brushed against it. It was more than an invitation. It was proof that destiny had offered her a door she had never been allowed to open before. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Damien entered without waiting for permission, closing the door quietly behind him. His composed expression remained, but the confidence that had always surrounded him seemed slightly fractured. "I deserve an explanation," he said. "Everyone deserves one after what happened today." Evelyn faced the window instead of looking at him. Outside, the afternoon sun stretched across the distant mountains exactly as it had in her first life, yet the future beyond those peaks had already begun to change. "Some explanations arrived too late," she answered calmly. Damien stepped closer. "Yesterday you loved me." The words lingered in the room between them. Evelyn slowly turned toward him. There had been a time when hearing his voice alone could calm every fear inside her heart. Now she searched his face and found only the memory of someone she had once believed in. "Yesterday is gone," she replied. He frowned. "People do not change overnight." She almost smiled at the irony. If only he knew how many nights she had carried inside her soul. "Sometimes they do," she said. Softly, Damien studied her in silence, searching for the woman who had always welcomed him with unquestioning affection. Instead he found quiet certainty. It unsettled him more than anger ever could. "Is this because of Lucian Thornridge?" he finally asked. "You barely know him." Evelyn held his gaze. "Perhaps I never truly knew the person standing in front of me either." Those words struck deeper than she intended, and for the first time Damien looked genuinely uncertain. Before he could answer, another voice echoed from the hallway. Vanessa Cole appeared at the open doorway with graceful confidence, carrying a stack of documents meant for Damien's review. "I hope I am not interrupting," she said with an apologetic smile that seemed perfectly innocent. The instant Evelyn saw her, forgotten memories flooded back with startling clarity. The elegant posture, the carefully chosen words, the harmless smile that concealed endless ambition. In her previous life, Evelyn had welcomed Vanessa as a trusted friend. She would never make that mistake again. Vanessa noticed the unusual tension between them and offered Evelyn a sympathetic look. "Everyone is worried about you. I only hope everything returns to normal soon." Evelyn answered with polite composure. "Not everything should return to the way it was." Vanessa blinked, surprised by the unexpected response. Damien accepted the documents without taking his eyes off Evelyn, but she had already made her decision. She crossed the room, opened a small travel chest, and quietly placed a few personal belongings inside. Damien watched in disbelief. "What are you doing?" Evelyn fastened the lid and lifted the chest with calm determination. "Preparing for the future." Early the next morning, before the first rays of sunlight reached the castle towers, she would leave through the eastern gate carrying nothing except a silver coin, a lifetime of painful memories, and the hope that this time she was finally walking toward the right man instead of away from the wrong one. Before dawn painted the eastern sky with pale shades of silver and blue, Evelyn quietly stepped beyond the gates of Ashford Estate carrying only a small travel case and the royal coin hidden safely inside her cloak. The morning air felt crisp against her face, carrying the scent of pine forests that stretched toward the Thornridge border. Every mile she traveled felt like another chain falling away from the life she had once believed she wanted. Behind her remained familiar walls filled with broken promises. Ahead waited uncertainty, but for the first time uncertainty felt kinder than certainty ever had. As the first rays of sunlight reached the winding mountain road, a line of riders appeared through the morning mist. Their silver armor reflected the light with quiet elegance, and at their center rode Lucian Thornridge upon a powerful black horse that moved with calm confidence rather than intimidation. He slowed the moment he recognized Evelyn standing exactly where he had instructed her to be. She stepped forward without hesitation and placed the silver coin into his gloved hand. Lucian examined it briefly before returning it to her. "You came," he said. "I said I would." His expression remained composed. Many people make bold declarations in crowded halls. Very few keep them when no one is watching. Evelyn answered with a faint smile. "That is why I came alone." For a moment neither of them spoke. The surrounding guards remained respectfully silent, while the forest awakened around them with birdsong and rustling leaves. Finally Lucian motioned toward an empty horse traveling beside his own. "Ride with us." They continued eastward through towering evergreens and rolling hills until the sun climbed higher above the mountains. Conversation remained sparse, yet the silence between them felt thoughtful rather than uncomfortable. Lucian eventually broke it. "Yesterday you asked to become my wife. Today I will ask you something far more important." "Why?" Evelyn looked toward the distant horizon before answering. "Because I know that choosing the easy path does not always lead to the right future." Lucian studied her profile. "That is an unusual answer." She gave a quiet laugh. "My life has become unusual." He did not press further, although curiosity lingered behind his calm gray eyes. Hours later the delegation approached a narrow mountain pass where steep cliffs rose on both sides of the trail. Evelyn immediately felt her heartbeat quicken. She recognized every curve of the road, every weathered stone, every towering cedar leaning over the path. Memory rushed through her with startling clarity. This was the place. In her previous life, news had spread that Lucian Thornridge narrowly escaped an organized ambush here while returning from diplomatic negotiations. The attack had failed, but it had fueled years of distrust and conflict between neighboring kingdoms. Evelyn suddenly pulled the reins, bringing her horse to a stop. "Your Majesty," she called with unexpected urgency. Every rider turned toward her. Lucian guided his horse closer. "What is it?" Evelyn looked toward the steep ridge overlooking the trail. She could not explain how she knew. She could only trust the memories that had already proven true. "Please do not continue through this pass." Lucian's expression sharpened. "Why?" She met his gaze steadily. "Because someone has been waiting for you there since before sunrise." The guards instinctively looked toward the rocky cliffs while Lucian remained perfectly still, measuring every word she had spoken. He had no evidence that she was right, yet something inside him quietly insisted that ignoring her warning would be a mistake. Lucian did not answer immediately. Instead, he raised one hand, and his entire delegation halted without a single question. The discipline of his guards impressed Evelyn as much as the king himself. There was no panic, no confusion, only quiet obedience. Lucian studied the rocky ridge above the narrow trail before turning to his captain. "Send 2 scouts along the northern slope. Do not announce yourselves. Observe first and report only what you see." The captain bowed and disappeared into the forest with another guard. Minutes passed with nothing but the sound of wind moving through the pine branches. Evelyn kept her eyes fixed on the ridge, her pulse refusing to settle. She remembered waiting for news of this incident in her previous life, hearing only that the Alpha King had narrowly avoided disaster through extraordinary luck. Now she stood inside the memory itself, praying that changing one decision would be enough to reshape everything that followed. At last the scouts returned. The captain dismounted and approached Lucian with a solemn expression. "Your Majesty, several armed men are concealed among the rocks overlooking the pass. They have not noticed us." A heavy silence followed those words. Several guards instinctively reached for their weapons, but Lucian calmly lifted a hand, signaling restraint. "We will take the western trail instead," he said. "There is no reason to give strangers the opportunity they are waiting for." The order was carried out immediately. The entire delegation quietly turned away from the mountain pass, disappearing into a dense forest path that wound around the cliffs. No confrontation occurred. No lives were placed at unnecessary risk. The hidden threat simply remained behind, waiting for travelers who would never arrive. As the mountain pass disappeared in the distance, Lucian guided his horse beside Evelyn once more. "You have now predicted two events that no reasonable person should have known," he said. "First, you appeared exactly where I invited you despite having every reason to remain with your family. Second, you warned me about a danger that proved to be real." Evelyn remained silent for several moments. "Would you believe me if I explained everything?" Lucian looked ahead at the quiet road stretching before them. "That depends on whether the explanation asks me to abandon reason." She smiled faintly. "Then perhaps it is better if I earn your trust before I ask for your belief." Unexpectedly, Lucian returned the smallest hint of a smile. It transformed his usually reserved expression into something surprisingly warm. A wise answer. They continued riding until the towers of Thornridge Castle appeared beyond a sparkling lake surrounded by evergreen forests. Unlike the grand palaces Evelyn had known, this fortress blended naturally into the mountains, built from pale gray stone that reflected the afternoon light. It felt strong without appearing proud, peaceful without appearing weak. As they crossed the drawbridge, servants and soldiers greeted Lucian with genuine respect rather than fearful obedience. Evelyn quietly noticed the difference. Power built upon trust carried an entirely different atmosphere from power maintained through appearances alone. That evening, after she had been shown to a comfortable guest chamber overlooking the valley, a servant arrived with a handwritten note bearing the royal seal. Evelyn unfolded it carefully. There were only 2 sentences written in elegant script. "You protected my people today without asking for anything in return. Tomorrow morning I would like to hear the truth, whatever you are willing to share." Evelyn looked through the open window as the first stars appeared above the mountains. For the first time since awakening in her second life, she realized that someone was no longer questioning whether she deserved to be believed. Instead, he was patiently waiting for her to decide when she was ready to trust him. The following morning arrived wrapped in cool mountain mist as sunlight slowly spilled across the stone terraces of Thornridge Castle. Evelyn entered the royal library expecting questions that would be impossible to answer, yet Lucian greeted her with the same calm dignity she had seen since the moment they met. Maps, reports, and sealed letters covered the long oak table between them. He invited her to sit before speaking. "I promised to hear whatever truth you were willing to share," he said. "I will keep that promise." Evelyn looked at the scattered documents and immediately recognized several royal seals. In her previous life, these letters had marked the beginning of a series of political mistakes that weakened Thornridge for years. She closed her eyes for a brief moment before opening them again with quiet resolve. "I cannot explain how I know what I know," she admitted. "If I tried, it would sound impossible. But I know which alliances will fail, which agreements will be broken, and which people cannot be trusted." Lucian folded his hands thoughtfully instead of dismissing her words. "Then do not explain. Show me." He pushed 3 unopened letters toward her. "Choose one." Evelyn immediately reached for the letter bearing the crest of East Hollow. "Do not sign this agreement," she said without hesitation. "The grain shipment they promise will never arrive. A severe storm will destroy the northern bridges within 2 weeks, and they already know it." Lucian quietly opened the letter and read its contents before handing it to one of his advisors. "Verify every detail." The advisor bowed and hurried away. Next, Evelyn pointed toward another document. "Accept this proposal instead. The Silver River Pack will remain loyal for many years if they are treated as equals rather than subordinates." Lucian observed her carefully. She never appeared uncertain. She answered as though she had already witnessed every outcome. Hours passed as they discussed trade routes, neighboring territories, and diplomatic decisions. Each answer she offered carried practical wisdom instead of empty confidence. By the afternoon, messengers began returning with unexpected confirmations. Reports from the northern roads revealed severe weather approaching exactly where Evelyn had predicted. Another courier confirmed unusual activity near East Hollow that cast immediate doubt upon the proposed agreement. Even Lucian's most experienced advisors exchanged astonished looks. After the final messenger departed, silence settled across the library. Lucian slowly walked toward the tall windows overlooking the valley below. "Since childhood," he said quietly, "I have learned that trust must be built one choice at a time. Today you have earned more of mine than many people earn in years." Evelyn felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her heart. He was not praising her because she pleased him. He respected her because she had proven herself through actions. The difference meant more than she expected. As evening approached, a royal messenger arrived carrying fresh correspondence from the Western Territories. Lucian read the letter only briefly before his expression became thoughtful. "Damien Blackwood has requested permission to visit Thornridge Castle," he said. Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table. She had known this moment would eventually come, but she had not expected it so soon. Lucian carefully folded the letter and looked directly into her eyes. He claims he wishes to understand why the woman who once trusted him now refuses even to look back. Outside, the castle bells echoed across the mountains as the setting sun bathed the valley in gold. And Evelyn realized that the past she had escaped was already beginning to follow her into the future she was trying to build. Damien Blackwood arrived at Thornridge Castle beneath a clear autumn sky. But the confidence that had always surrounded him had quietly faded during the long journey. The proud alpha who once believed the future belonged to him now stood at the gates as a guest requesting permission to enter another king's home. Lucian welcomed him with flawless courtesy, offering every respect owed to a neighboring leader while revealing nothing of his own thoughts. Evelyn remained composed as she entered the audience chamber. When her eyes met Damien's, she felt no anger, no longing, and no bitterness. She simply saw a chapter of her life that had already ended. Damien noticed the difference immediately. The warmth that had once greeted him had disappeared, replaced by calm dignity that he had never truly appreciated until it was gone. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "I came because I need to understand." She answered with the same peaceful voice that had become her greatest strength. "Sometimes understanding arrives only after we lose what we refuse to value." Damien lowered his eyes for a moment. "If I failed you, then allow me to make it right." Evelyn gently shook her head. "You are trying to repair a future that no longer exists." The silence that followed carried more truth than any argument could have expressed. Lucian watched without interruption, allowing both of them the respect of speaking honestly. Damien finally looked toward the Alpha King. "Have you already chosen each other?" Lucian answered without hesitation. "Trust is not chosen in a single day. It is built through countless decisions. Lady Evelyn has shown courage, wisdom, and integrity every step since arriving here. That is why she has earned my respect." Those words settled deeply inside Damien's heart. For the first time he realized that Lucian admired Evelyn not because she belonged to him, but because of the person she truly was. Damien slowly turned back toward Evelyn. "I spent so long believing you would always remain beside me that I forgot to become someone worthy of standing beside you." Evelyn smiled gently, without triumph and without resentment. "Then let that lesson become the beginning of your own future." Damien nodded, accepting the answer he had traveled so far to hear. He bowed respectfully to both of them before leaving the audience chamber with quiet dignity. He had not recovered what he lost, but perhaps he had finally begun to understand why he lost it. Several weeks later, beneath a brilliant blue sky overlooking the mountains of Thornridge, nobles from every neighboring kingdom gathered once again. This time there were no whispers of scandal, only quiet anticipation. Lucian stood before Evelyn and placed a beautifully crafted silver ring upon her hand. "I cannot promise you a life without storms," he said, his gray eyes filled with unwavering sincerity. "But I promise that you will never face them alone." Evelyn felt tears gather in her eyes as she answered, "And I promise that every future I am given will be spent protecting the peace we choose together." As applause echoed across the valley, sunlight illuminated the castle towers and the forests beyond them. Evelyn looked toward the distant horizon and realized that destiny had never been about receiving another chance to change someone else. It had been about finding the courage to change herself. In one life she had begged for love from the wrong man and lost everything. In her second life she chose self-respect before affection, truth before illusion, and hope before fear. By making that single decision, she discovered the kind of love that never demanded she become less than herself. The woman who had once died believing her story had ended in betrayal now smiled as the Queen of Thornridge, knowing that the greatest victories are not won by revenge, but by choosing a future where kindness, trust, and genuine love are finally allowed to bloom.